Hi guys, this is Andrew with Headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to talk about some of the new Campfire audio IEMs that have come out for 2020. And I should actually say that these are refreshes of existing IEMs that they have, specifically the new Campfire Andromeda 2020, and then the new Campfire Solaris 2020 as well. So let's take a look. Now, before we begin, I think it's also important to note that you could probably still find the old versions around. However, I think eventually they're going to be moving to the new versions, and it'll be harder and harder to find the older ones. But to begin with, let's talk first about the Andromeda. It's been one of the go-to flagships for everybody for a long time. And actually, they've recently done a refresh on this Andromeda before they did the 2020 update. And that included a new cable, this sort of smoke cable they call it, which is a big improvement on the old one. And when I say old, I mean the one that I previously owned. And then the case is a little bit different as well. The older case is not this sort of taco shaped. I don't know how to describe that. It was more of just like a rectangular box. I kind of like the old box, actually. But apart from that, the tuning stayed the same for that Andromeda refresh. And now in 2020, we have another update where the tuning is actually a little bit different. And of course, you get a totally different looking case from the previous one. And in my opinion, this new case looks pretty darn cool. I mean, it's taken the camping aspect of Campfire audio and put it into a case aesthetic, and I like that. Apart from that, let's talk about what the physical differences are, and that is actually that the new nozzle here, for the new one, it's this sort of grill-looking thing, whereas on the old one, you get the 3 holes instead. Now let's go over some of the sonic differences that I think are important to talk about. It's not a huge difference. It's a very subtle difference, but I think it's actually an important one. The new Campfire Andromeda, that's this one here, the new Campfire Andromeda has slightly less treble, and specifically in the constant range, the sort of mid-treble, which on the old Andromeda could occasionally come across a little bit hot. I think I actually got used to it after a while, and you can definitely use different tips and mess around with different sources to make it less hot and make it a little bit more agreeable. But they've reduced the treble here slightly with the new one, and then but it's very, very subtle. And then they've also boosted the mid-range a little bit here, and I think that extra mid-range presence really does help. It makes a difference and improves the Andromeda overall, so that it just has better tonal balance. So the vocal presence that you get for the mid-range and upper mid-range is a little bit more balanced there. And then in the treble, for any of the consonant sounds like S's and F's and T's, they don't come across quite as strongly either. And I was actually on the fence about this initially because I thought maybe one of these changes would be appropriate, but both of them together might have an overall effect on it that just made it not as lively and fun to listen to. But it's so subtle in the treble that I think it's just the right amount. And so I think overall the new 2020 Andromeda is just flat out better than the old one. Or at least it's more to my preference, because rather than having that somewhat bass boost and treble boost, it's just a little bit more balanced there with a little bit of extra mid-range presence, and then the treble's taken down a little bit. You still have the bass boost that exists there, with the old one as well, but it's not as notably emphasized because there's now a bit more mid-range presence there to keep it in line with everything else. I think overall this is just a good change. And I know there are people who love the treble presentation of the older Andromeda, and they don't want that messed with at all. But if I was to be critical of the tuning of the old Andromeda, it would be not enough mids, and then the treble is just a little bit hot, and both of those issues are improved on the new one. And actually, just on that note with the Andromeda, I often use the Andromeda with foam tips here, the old Andromeda with foam tips, because it did curb some of that treble just a little bit. But I think with the new one, you'd probably be best suited to using the silicone tips. You don't really want to be curbing the treble here because it has now been taken down to a little bit of a more, let's say, appropriate level. Again, I know there are people who they bought the original Andromeda specifically for its treble, and by all means, I'm not taking anything away from that, but for my preferences, the new one I think is better. And again, I would use this with silicone tips, not the foam ones that are on here right now. All right, let's move now to the Campfire Solaris. And this change is much more immediately noticeable visually. The new Solaris is a completely black design for the shell, and the older one, it had like a whole bunch of gold here on the side. One of the complaints of the old Solaris was that it was a little bit large. You know, when you put it on, it would just protrude out from your ears a little bit much. And with this one, it doesn't. It's a little bit more normal in terms of size. And actually, it's really not that much different in size from the Andromeda. They're actually about the same size now. So the new Solaris is physically smaller, and that also makes it more comfortable. I didn't have a huge problem with the old one, but I know some people did. So you know, this is a welcome change. But there are also some sonic differences as well. Immediately, this one sounds a little bit brighter in the treble. And this is one where I don't know if I like this better, not necessarily. Now, there are certain things about the new Solaris that I do like better. They added a bit more energy there in the upper mids here. At least that's how it sounds to me. And yeah, just when I was comparing, you know, all of these different IEMs, the Solaris is fantastic. It is a little bit of that, you know, guilty pleasure fun kind of sound, but I really like it. And I think with this one here, with the extra added upper mid-range clarity there, it just improves it a little bit more. The original Solaris had really good treble extension there in the air region. You know, it didn't feel rolled off or anything like that. You had really good representation of cymbal tones. That's all there with the new Solaris. But I do feel that it's a little bit less relaxed than it was before. You know, before it was very non-fatiguing, and now it's a little bit more treble energy there. Not a huge amount, and not to a degree that I think is bothersome. But I definitely did notice, you know, the consonant sounds a little bit more strongly on the new one. And then I think there's a little bit more upper mid-range here on the new Solaris, which is very welcome. And to the point where I think overall, again, the new Solaris is a little bit more well-balanced there for the mid-range. I think because the mid-range is a little bit more balanced here with the new Solaris, it doesn't have the upper mid-range dip as strongly that kind of fakes the soundstage or increases the perception of soundstage. And so as a result, it doesn't feel quite as spacious, but at the same time, I don't think it actually loses any lateral definition as a result of that. Again, I think it's just more just the result of that slight tuning change that happened that causes this difference to be noticeable. And if you want to notice this yourself, just take any headphone that has a dip in the upper mid-range and then just boost the mid-range up, and you'll notice that the soundstage suddenly is not as spacious as you thought it would be. The Solaris case here, this is the new case for the Solaris. This is awesome. I think this is actually some kind of leather on the front, but they made it look like it's, you know, pieces of wood, so that's kind of cool. The older case was much larger and more cumbersome than this, so this is a lot more fun to just throw in a backpack. So overall, I think these are welcome changes. I think if I were to choose between the Andromedas, the new Andromeda would be the way to go. It's my preference. It's a little bit more balanced there. If you want more of that kind of V-shaped sound, then the old Andromeda is probably the way to go. Same thing with the Solaris. If you want a little bit more of a relaxed treble presentation with a little bit of a, let's say, more spacious seeming presentation, the older Solaris is probably the way to go. But if you want a more balanced mid-range, which I definitely do, the newer Solaris is probably the way to go. And of course, if you want it to be smaller and not gold, the newer one is the way to go as well. Apart from the tonality differences, I don't notice any substantial change in technicalities in terms of detail or anything like that. The Solaris, once again, you get the hybrid, you know, you get the 4 drivers, but one of them is a dynamic driver here to handle bass frequencies. It's a lot of fun. It's a guilty pleasure kind of bass, but I do prefer it over the bass of the Andromeda. It's just more impactful, hits a little bit harder. So it's a good refresh from Campfire Audio. I think if you already own one of the older ones, I don't know if you'd really need to upgrade to the newer ones because they don't change it that much. But for anybody looking at the newer ones and they're comparing for everything else around, you know, that price range, the newer ones, I think they just got better, at least in the case of the Andromeda, right? It's just more different in the case of the Solaris, but that's more of a preference thing that I do appreciate it. Anyways, that does it for this quick comparison. If you guys like what I'm doing here, consider subscribing, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.